Red wine dripped down Cole Brennan's face. He didn't wipe it. His hands were busy covering his 7-year-old daughter's eyes, shielding little Rosie from the laughter rippling through the Sterling's dining room.
This mess.
Sloane Mercer stood over him, smirking his designer suit, worth more than Cole would earn in a year. People like you, Sloane sneered loud enough for every table to hear, are born to kneel. Rosie's tiny fingers trembled against her father's chest. Somewhere, a fork clinked against porcelain. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Vivian Ashford, the billionaire CEO, rose from her seat. But she didn't walk toward her fiancé. She walked past Sloane like he didn't exist. And when she stopped in front of Cole, she did something that turned every whisper into stone. She bowed. What Vivian said next would unravel a truth buried for 12 years. 6 months earlier, Cole Brennan stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 4:30 in the morning, practicing his smile. It was the kind of smile that said, everything is fine when nothing was. The kind that hid sleepless nights and overdue bills and the weight of raising a daughter alone. He adjusted the collar of his white dress shirt, the fabric crisp from careful ironing the night before. His reflection stared back at him, 34 years old, but looking closer to 40. Dark circles under his eyes. Lines etched around his mouth from years of forcing cheer he didn't feel. The scar on his right forearm caught the light, a pale ridge of tissue that ran from his wrist to just below his elbow. He never talked about it. Some stories were too heavy to carry in conversation. In the small bedroom down the hall, 7-year-old Rosie was already awake. She sat cross-legged on her bed, a worn, stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, watching the door with the patience of a child who had learned early that waiting was part of life. When Cole appeared in the doorway, her face broke into a grin that made every hard thing in his life feel worth it. That smile was his anchor, his reason for getting up before dawn and falling asleep after midnight. "Morning sunshine," he said, crossing the room to kiss her forehead. She smelled like baby shampoo and sleep like innocence and everything he was fighting to protect. "You ready for school?" Rosie nodded, but her eyes followed him as he moved around the room, gathering her clothes, checking her backpack. She was always watching, always studying him with those bright, curious eyes. Sometimes Cole wondered how much she understood about their situation. Children saw more than adults gave them credit for. The apartment was small, a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. Cole slept on the pull-out couch, so Rosie could have the bedroom. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing about money, about kids, about all the small failures that add up to big ones. The plumbing groaned like an old man getting out of bed, and the heating worked only when it felt like it. But the rent was manageable, and it was close to Rosie's school, and those two things mattered more than granite countertops or central air. Cole had learned to measure wealth differently in the years since his wife died. Wealth was waking up next to his daughter every morning. Wealth was the drawings she made him taped crookedly to the refrigerator. Wealth was the sound of her laughter echoing through their tiny home. Breakfast was scrambled eggs and toast, the same as every morning. Cole had become an expert at stretching a carton of eggs through the week, at making meals feel special even when the ingredients were basic. He'd learned recipes from YouTube videos, watched on his cracked phone screen, figured out how to turn leftovers into new dishes, discovered that love was the best seasoning he could add. He sat across from Rosie at the small kitchen table, watching her eat, asking about her homework, about her friends, about the drawing she'd been working on. She talked with her mouth full, gesturing with her fork, telling him about a butterfly they'd seen at recess. Cole didn't correct her manners. These moments were precious. The morning rush, the ordinary chaos of getting a child ready for school. He'd trade every boardroom in the world for this. After dropping Rosie at school with a kiss and a promise to pick her up at 3, Cole took 2 buses to reach the Sterling, the upscale restaurant where he'd worked for the past 8 months. It was the kind of place that served $40 steaks and wines that cost more than his monthly utilities. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. White tablecloths gleamed under soft light, and waitstaff moved in pressed black vests with the precision of dancers. Cole had never eaten at a restaurant like this in his life. Now he spent 6 nights a week serving people who probably spent more on appetizers than he spent on groceries. The irony wasn't lost on him, but irony didn't pay the bills. His manager, a thin man named Gerald, with a perpetual expression of mild disappointment, met him at the staff entrance. "Brennan, you're on the main floor tonight, table 12 through 18. Cole nodded, tucking his time card into the slot. Gerald paused, eyeing him with something that might have been concern or might have been irritation. "Your daughter. She's here again." Cole's jaw tightened, the familiar tension of a father forced to make impossible choices. "My sitter canceled. I'll keep her in the back. She won't cause any trouble." Gerald sighed the sigh of a man who had given up on enforcing rules that kept getting broken. "Kitchen corner. And she stays quiet. I mean it this time, Brennan." Rosie had a spot in the kitchen, a small stool near the prep station where she could do her homework without getting in anyone's way. The kitchen staff had grown fond of her over the months, sneaking her scraps of bread and bits of chocolate when Gerald wasn't looking. Chef Martinez called her picanha and saved her the best desserts. The line cooks let her help arrange garnishes on slow nights. She sat there, now, her math worksheet spread out on a cutting board, her tongue poking out in concentration, the same way her mother's used to. Cole knelt beside her, straightening her papers. "You okay here for a few hours, baby girl?" Rosie looked up at him, her eyes so much like her mother's that it still took his breath away sometimes. The same shade of brown, the same depth of feeling. "Daddy, are you ashamed of working here?" The question hit him like a punch to the chest. He'd heard the whispers, of course. The other parents at school, pick up the neighbors in his building, even some of the customers who recognized him night after night. A man his age waiting tables, dragging his daughter to work because he couldn't afford childcare. He knew what they thought, what they said behind his back when they thought he couldn't hear. But he'd never expected Rosie to hear it too. Cole took her small hands in his calloused palms against soft fingers. "Never," he said, his voice steady, even though something inside him was cracking. "I'm proud of this job. You know why?" She shook her head, her rabbit ears flopping with the motion. "Because it lets me be with you every morning. It lets me pick you up from school. It lets me tuck you in at night." He squeezed her hands gently. "Some people might look down on what I do. But there's no shame in honest work, Rosie. There's no shame in taking care of the people you love. That's all that matters." Rosie studied his face for a long moment, the way she always did when she was deciding whether to believe something. She was smart, this kid. Too smart sometimes. Then she nodded a small, solemn gesture that made her look older than her years. "I think you're the bravest person in the whole world, Daddy." Cole pulled her into a hug, holding her tight against his chest, breathing in the scent of her hair. The bravest person in the world. If only she knew how often he lay awake at night, terrified he was failing her. Terrified that one missed shift, one unexpected expense, one stroke of bad luck would send their fragile life tumbling down. But she didn't need to know that. She needed to believe in him. And so he would keep smiling, keep working, keep putting one foot in front of the other until something gave. The dinner service began at 5. Cole moved through the restaurant like water, taking orders, refilling glasses, clearing plates with silent efficiency. He'd learned the rhythm of this work, the way to anticipate what a table needed, before they asked the way to be present without being intrusive. Invisible. That was the goal. To be so good at the job that customers never really saw him at all. Some treated him like furniture, talking through him as if he wasn't there. Others were kind, making small talk, leaving generous tips that felt like validation. And some select few seemed to enjoy reminding him of his place in the world. Cole had developed a thick skin over the months. He smiled at the rude ones, just as warmly as the polite ones. He couldn't afford the luxury of pride. Around 7, he glanced toward the kitchen and saw Rosie watching him through the pass-through window, her small face framed by stainless steel and steam. She gave him a small wave, and he waved back, mouthing, "I love you," across the crowded dining room. She grinned, then ducked back to her homework. These small moments of connection were like oxygen. They kept him going through the long hours, through the aching feet and the forced smiles, and the customers who snapped their fingers to get his attention like he was a dog. For her, he could endure anything. For her, he would. The first time Vivian Ashford walked into the Sterling Cole, didn't know who she was. He only knew that the entire staff suddenly straightened their postures, that Gerald materialized from nowhere to personally escort her party to the best table in the house, that the sommelier appeared with a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Cole's monthly rent. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn directly onto her body. Dark hair pulled back in a sleek twist that probably cost more to maintain than Cole's entire wardrobe. Sharp features, sharper eyes that seemed to take in everything and everyone at once. She was 38 years old and moved through the room like she owned it, which Cole would later learn she practically did. Her company had investments in half the buildings on this block. The man beside her was different. Sloane Mercer had the kind of handsome face that knew it was handsome, the kind of easy confidence that came from never being told no, never having to work for anything, never wondering where his next meal would come from. His suit was slightly too flashy, his watch slightly too large, his laugh slightly too loud. Everything about him screamed, "Look at me," in a way that made Cole instinctively want to look away. He walked with his hand on the small of Vivian's back, a gesture that seemed less affectionate than possessive, like she was another expensive thing he'd acquired. Something about Sloane Mercer made the hair on the back of Cole's neck stand up, a primal warning he couldn't quite explain. Gerald assigned Cole to their table with nervous precision. "Table 14. VIP. Don't screw this up, Brennan." "I mean it." Cole grabbed a pitcher of water and made his way across the floor, weaving between tables with practiced grace. As he approached, he caught a snippet of conversation. Sloane was talking about quarterly projections and board meetings, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who expected to be listened to and agreed with. "The numbers are solid. We just need to convince the board that the expansion is worth the risk." Vivian's response was quiet or measured. "The board will need more than projections, Sloane. They'll need proof of concept." Cole reached the table and began filling their water glasses, his movements precise and unobtrusive. The water poured without a splash, without a sound. Sloane glanced up at him with the kind of look that people reserve for furniture that's gotten in their way. No acknowledgement. No please or thank you. Just a flicker of annoyance at having to share space with someone so clearly beneath him. "We'll start with the tasting menu and bring the Chateau Margaux 2015. No please there either. Cole inclined his head. "Of course, sir. And for the lady." Vivian looked up from her menu, and for a brief moment her eyes met his. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps? Or recognition? But it passed so quickly Cole thought he might have imagined it. "The same," she said, her voice neutral. "Thank you." She was the only one who said thank you. As Cole walked away, he felt eyes on his back. Not Sloane's dismissive gaze, but something more intent, more searching. In the kitchen, he paused by Rosie's corner, touching her shoulder briefly. She was working on a drawing now her math finished. "Doing okay." She nodded without looking up, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. "There's a pretty lady at your table," she whispered conspiratorially. I saw her through the window." Cole smiled despite himself. "Yeah, what did you think?" Rosie considered this seriously the way only children can. "She looks important, like a queen or something." She paused, adding another stroke to her drawing. "But sad. She looks sad even when she's smiling." Out of the mouths of babes, Cole thought. He'd noticed it too, something beneath Vivian Ashford's polished exterior. A heaviness that expensive clothes and power couldn't quite conceal. A loneliness that recognized loneliness. The dinner service for table 14 proceeded without incident. Cole brought their courses one by one, refilled their wine with practiced precision, cleared their plates at exactly the right moment. He was professional, efficient, invisible, exactly what a good waiter should be, the kind of waiter who faded into the background of people's expensive evenings. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Vivian was watching him. Not in the way Sloane watched the young waitresses with obvious appraisal that made Cole's jaw clench. Something more subtle, more searching. At one point, when Cole reached across the table to remove an empty bread basket, his sleeve rode up, exposing the scar on his forearm. The pale tissue gleamed under the restaurant's soft lighting. Vivian's eyes dropped to it, then back to his face. Her expression didn't change, but her hand wrapped around her wine glass tightened almost imperceptibly. The night wound down. The restaurant emptied table by table, the hum of conversation fading to quiet. Cole was wiping down his section when Gerald approached with the leather check folder for table 14. "They asked for you specifically," Gerald said, his tone suggesting this was unusual and possibly suspicious. Cole took the folder and made his way to the table where Vivian and Sloane sat finishing their wine. Sloane barely glanced at him as he took the folder and slipped a black card inside without looking at the total. "Service was acceptable." He said the kind of compliment that wasn't really a compliment at all. But Vivian spoke before Cole could retreat. "Your daughter. The little girl in the kitchen." Cole went still, every muscle in his body tensing. In 8 months of working here, no customer had ever acknowledged Rosie's presence. "She's been sitting there all evening doing her homework. Is that where she usually spends her nights?" Her voice held no judgment, only curiosity. Perhaps something else. Something that sounded almost like concern. Cole chose his words carefully. "My childcare arrangement fell through. I apologize if she disturbed you in any way." Vivian shook her head slowly, her eyes still on his face. "She didn't. She paused, as if catching herself about to say something she hadn't planned. "It must be difficult. Raising a child alone." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Sloane looked up from his phone, annoyance flickering across his features. "Vivian, the car is waiting. We have the charity board meeting in the morning." But she didn't move. She was looking at Cole with an intensity that made him feel exposed, like she was seeing past the uniform and the servile posture to something underneath. "What's her name?" Cole hesitated, but there was something in Vivian's expression, something that wasn't pity or condescension, but genuine interest that made him answer. "Rosie. She's 7. Vivian's face did something complicated. Her eyes went soft, then sad, then carefully blank again like shutters closing. "Rosie," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. "That's a beautiful name." Then she stood, gathered her coat, and walked out without another word, leaving Cole standing there, wondering what had just happened. Sloane lingered a moment longer, his eyes narrowing at Cole with cold assessment. "My fiancée is too soft sometimes," he said, his voice low enough that only Cole could hear. "She has this weakness for strays and charity cases. Don't mistake her kindness for anything more than it is." He stepped closer, close enough that Cole could smell his expensive cologne. "People like us don't really see people like you. We look right through you. Remember your place, waiter." He pressed the check folder into Cole's chest, hard enough to make him take a step back, and followed Vivian out the door. Cole stood there for a long moment, the folder clutched in his hands. When he finally opened it, he found a tip larger than any he'd ever received. $1,000 written in crisp, careful handwriting. No note, just the money. The second visit came 3 weeks later, and the third a week after that. Vivian Ashford and Sloane Mercer became regulars at the Sterling, always requesting Cole's section, always ordering the same tasting menu and overpriced wine. Cole didn't understand it. There were better restaurants in the city, more exclusive, more impressive places where billionaires could dine without rubbing elbows with people like him. Yet they kept coming back, and every time Sloane's treatment of Cole grew worse. It started small, the way cruelty often does. A complaint about the temperature of the soup, sending it back twice, even though it was perfect. A comment about Cole's shuffling gait that drew snickers from nearby tables. A too loud observation about how some people lacked the ambition to make something of themselves, delivered, while looking directly at Cole. These were the pinpricks, the small cuts designed to bleed dignity one drop at a time. Cole absorbed it all. His smile never wavering, his service never faltering. He'd dealt with difficult customers before. He could handle this. But Sloane seemed to sense that Cole wasn't breaking, and it made him push harder, dig deeper, searching for the wound that would finally make Cole flinch. The incident with the wine happened on their fourth visit. Cole was pouring the Bordeaux, the bottle tilted at exactly the right angle, when Sloane deliberately bumped the table. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth like blood on snow. "Clumsy," Sloane announced loud enough for neighboring tables to hear, loud enough to make heads turn. "I suppose that's why you're pouring wine instead of drinking it. Some people just don't have the coordination for finer things." The other diners glanced over. A few smirked, complicit in the humiliation. Cole apologized smoothly, his voice steady, even as his blood boiled, signaled for fresh linens, continued as if nothing had happened. But when he returned to the kitchen, his hands were shaking so badly he had to grip the counter to steady them. Rosie was at her usual spot, working on a drawing of a house with a big yard and a dog. She looked up as he passed her small face, pinched with worry that no 7-year-old should have to carry. "Daddy, that man is mean to you." Cole paused, kneeling beside her, so their eyes were level. "Sometimes people aren't very nice, sweetheart. But that's their problem, not ours. We can't control how other people act. We can only control how we respond." Rosie shook her head, unconvinced by his adult wisdom. "He should say sorry. Miss Patterson says we always have to say sorry when we hurt someone's feelings." Cole smoothed her hair back from her face, tucking it behind her ear. "Miss Patterson is right. But not everyone follows the rules, baby girl. Not everyone learned the things you're learning." The comments grew sharper over the following weeks. The tips grew smaller. And then on a night in early November, Sloane noticed Rosie. They'd been careful, Cole and the kitchen staff, to keep her out of sight during VIP service. Chef Martinez would move her to the back pantry when the Ashford party arrived. The line cooks would form a human shield at the pass-through window. But that night, Rosie needed the bathroom, and the only route was through the edge of the dining room. Cole watched from across the restaurant, his heart stopping in his chest, as Sloane's eyes tracked his daughter like a predator spotting prey, as a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "I didn't realize the Sterling had become a daycare," Sloane said, when Cole returned to the table, his voice pitched to Carrie. "Is that your child? The one lurking around the kitchen like a little stray?" Cole's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at him to grab Rosie and run to get her away from this man's poisonous words. But Sloane wasn't finished. He was just warming up. "She's what, 6, 7? Already learning the family business, I suppose. Some people are born to serve after all." He swirled his wine with theatrical thoughtfulness. "It's genetic, really. You can see it in the way they carry themselves, in the slope of their shoulders. in the way they keep their eyes down like whipped dogs. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing with his glass. Like father, like daughter. Tell me, does she practice her yes sir, no sir, getting an early start on her inevitable career? The dining room had gone quiet. Cole could feel dozens of eyes on him, could hear the soft murmur of shocked whispers. His hands were clenched at his sides, his nails digging into his palms, hard enough to draw blood. Every instinct screamed at him to respond, to defend his daughter, to tell this man exactly what he thought of him. But he couldn't. He needed this job. He needed the money. Rosie needed him to swallow his pride and keep smiling. Vivian spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Sloane, that's enough." It was the first time Cole had heard her rebuke him, but Sloane only laughed a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, come on, Vivian. I'm just having a bit of fun. The man knows his place." "Don't you waiter?" He looked at Cole, waiting for submission. Cole forced the words out through a throat that felt like it was closing. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Sloane's smile widened, satisfied. "See perfect service. Like a well-trained dog." That night after the restaurant closed, Cole found Rosie asleep on her stool, her head pillowed on her math book, tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. She'd heard. Even in the kitchen, even with the staff trying to shield her, she'd heard. He gathered her in his arms, holding her close, feeling the warm weight of her against his chest. She stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep, then settled again, with her face against his neck. Cole stood there for a long time in the dark kitchen, his daughter in his arms, tears streaming silently down his face. He thought of his wife, Lila, of the life they'd planned together, of all the things she'd never get to see. He thought of the man he used to be before grief and necessity had worn him down to this. The following week, Sloane escalated again. This time, Rosie was clearly visible through the pass-through window, her small figure hunched over her homework. Sloane noticed immediately, his eyes lighting up with cruel anticipation. There she is again, the little urchin. Then came the words that nearly broke Cole. "You know what the tragedy is? She's a pretty thing. Could have had a chance if she'd been born to different circumstances." He turned to Vivian as if sharing a private joke. "But children inherit their parents' failures, don't they? She'll grow up poor just like him. She'll work jobs like this just like him. In 10 years, she'll be the one serving our children dinner. It's the natural order of things. The cream rises and the rest, well," he gestured dismissively at Cole, "the rest stays where it belongs." Cole looked at his daughter. Rosie was staring at Sloane through the window, her eyes wide, her lip trembling. She'd heard every word. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, and Cole saw something shatter in his little girl's face. The innocence that believed her daddy was the bravest person in the world. The trust that said grown-ups were supposed to be kind. She pressed her hand against the glass, tears rolling down her cheeks, and Cole felt something break inside him too. He walked to the kitchen. He knelt beside Rosie and pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him, her small body shaking with silent sobs. "Daddy," she whispered. "Why does he say those things? Why does he hate us?" Cole held her tighter, wishing he had an answer. "He doesn't hate us, baby. He just... Some people can't see past their own importance. They're so busy looking down that they never see what's right in front of them. But that's not about us. That's about something broken in them." Rosie pulled back, her face wet with tears. "But it hurts, Daddy. It hurts so much." Cole cupped her face in his hands, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "I know it does. I know. But listen to me. What he said about you, about our future, it's not true. You can be anything you want to be, anything at all. The only thing that decides who you become is you, not where you came from, not what people like him think, just you. Back in the dining room, Vivian Ashford sat very still. She hadn't touched her food since Sloane's tirade began. Her hands were folded in her lap, but if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen them trembling. Her eyes were fixed on the kitchen, on the silhouette of a father holding his daughter. On the way, Cole's shoulders curved protectively around the small girl, on a gesture she recognized from somewhere deep in her memory. She turned to look at Cole's forearm, at the scar that ran from wrist to elbow. She'd noticed it the first night, had felt a jolt of recognition so strong it almost knocked the breath out of her. But she'd convinced herself it was coincidence. There were many scars in the world, many men who carried them. But watching him now, watching the way he comforted his daughter, the way he held himself, even in humiliation, Vivian felt the walls of denial beginning to crack. She knew that posture. She knew that scar. She knew that particular quality of quiet strength that refused to bend, even when it should have broken. The night everything changed began like any other. Cole arrived at the Sterling at 4, got Rosie settled in her kitchen corner, with her homework and her rabbit tied on his apron. The reservation book showed Ashford party of 2 for table 14, 8 o'clock. Something was different tonight, though Cole couldn't pinpoint what. An electricity in the air, a sense of approaching storm. When Vivian and Sloane arrived, the tension was visible. Vivian's posture was rigid, her fingers wrapped too tightly around her water glass. She barely looked at Sloane, barely spoke when he tried to engage her. But Sloane seemed expansive, almost giddy, his voice louder than usual, his gestures broader. He ordered champagne, the most expensive bottle on the menu, and when it arrived, he raised his glass with a flourish. To us. To our engagement announcement next week. To the merger of our families and our futures. Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. It happened between the main course and dessert. Cole was clearing their plates when Sloane's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with bruising force. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to an imaginary smudge on the tablecloth. "Clean it." Cole's jaw tightened. "Of course, sir." He reached for a napkin, but Sloane didn't release his grip. "Not with that. Use your sleeve, the way a real servant would. On your knees, if you like." The restaurant went quiet, conversations dying mid-sentence, heads turning toward the drama unfolding at table 14. Cole met Sloane's eyes. For a long moment, neither man moved. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Then Cole slowly, deliberately wiped the non-existent spot with his bare hand. "Will that be sufficient, sir?" Sloane released him with a laugh. "See, Vivian, you can teach them anything if you're firm enough. Oh, and bring your little ragamuffin out here. I want to see her. I want to give her a tip." His eyes glittered with malice. A little lesson in how the world really works. He pulled a dollar bill from his wallet, dangling it between two fingers. $1 for the future waitress. She might as well start learning her worth now. A small voice cut through the silence. "Daddy." Rosie stood at the edge of the dining room, her homework clutched to her chest. She must have heard her name. She must have wondered what was happening. Her eyes went from Cole to Sloane to the dollar bill, and her lower lip began to tremble. Sloane's smile widened. "There she is. Perfect timing. Come here, little one. Uncle Sloane has something for you." Cole stepped between them in a single motion, his body a shield. "Don't." His voice was low, but carried through the silent restaurant. "Don't touch her. Don't talk to her. Don't even look at her." Sloane's expression flickered with surprise, then hardened into something ugly. "Excuse me. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I could do to you? I could have you fired before you take another breath. I could make sure you never work in this city again." Before Cole could respond, Sloane grabbed the nearest wineglass and hurled its contents into Cole's face. Red wine exploded across his white shirt, dripped down his chin, stained his carefully pressed uniform like a wound. The restaurant erupted in gasps. Someone dropped a fork. Someone else let out a nervous laugh. Cole stood motionless, wine streaming down his face, his hand still spread protectively in front of Rosie. He didn't wipe his eyes. He didn't move. He just stood there, a human wall between his daughter and the man who sought to humiliate them both. Behind him, Rosie let out a small, broken sob. Her tiny fingers found the back of his shirt, clutching the wet fabric. Cole reached back blindly, covering her eyes with his hand, shielding her from the stares, from the laughter, from everything. "People like you," Sloane sneered loud enough for every table to hear, "are born to kneel. You're born to serve. You're born to be invisible until someone needs their glass refilled. Know your place." And then everything stopped. The air itself seemed to freeze. Vivian Ashford rose from her seat. The movement was slow, deliberate, commanding, like watching a queen rise from her throne. Every eye in the restaurant turned to her. She didn't look at Sloane. She didn't acknowledge the whispers, or the stares, or the phone cameras that had inevitably appeared. She simply walked. Past her fiancé, past the shocked diners, past Gerald, who looked like he might collapse. She stopped in front of Cole close enough that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes, close enough to smell her perfume. For a moment, she just looked at him. Really looked in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do in 6 weeks of visits. At the wine dripping down his face, at the scar on his forearm, at the way he stood even now with his hand shielding his daughter's eyes, protecting her, always protecting her. Then Vivian Ashford, billionaire, CEO, one of the most powerful women in the country, did something that turned every whisper into stone. She lowered herself to her knees. Not a curtsy, not a bow. She knelt on the restaurant floor, her burgundy dress pooling around her like spilled wine, and she bowed her head before the man everyone else saw as just a waiter. The silence was absolute. No one breathed, no one moved. Even the kitchen had gone still. Sloane stood frozen behind her, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. Vivian looked up at Cole, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the entire room. "Cole Harrison Brennan." The name fell like a thunderclap. Founder of Ashford Industries. The man who wrote every line of code that built my empire. The man who saved my life when our office caught fire 12 years ago. Her voice broke. The man who walked away from billions so he could take care of his dying wife. So he could raise his daughter. She bowed her head again, tears falling onto the polished floor. "I should have found you sooner. I should have looked harder. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry it took me this long." Sloane stumbled backward, knocking into a waiter carrying a tray. What are you saying? This is insane. He's a waiter. He's nobody." Vivian rose to her feet, and when she turned to face her fiancé, her expression was ice. "He is the reason Ashford Industries exists. He is the reason I'm alive. And you." She stepped toward Sloane, and he actually flinched. "You have spent weeks humiliating him, mocking his daughter, treating him like dirt beneath your expensive shoes." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "The engagement is over. Get out of my sight. And if I ever see you near this man or his daughter again, I will destroy you." The story came out in fragments there, in the aftermath of the dining room's shocked silence. Gerald had ushered the remaining customers out with stammered apologies and complimentary dessert vouchers. The kitchen staff gathered at the pass-through window watching in stunned disbelief. Rosie sat on Cole's lap, her face buried in his chest, while Vivian filled in the gaps of 12 lost years. They'd met in college, she said, a computer science class where she was drowning, and he was the quiet genius who never raised his hand, but always had the answers everyone else missed. She'd asked him to tutor her. He'd agreed reluctantly at first then, with growing enthusiasm, as he discovered she understood business the way he understood code. They were 22 when they started Ashford Industries in her parents' garage. He wrote the software brilliant lines of code that would change an industry. She found the investors, pitched the vision, built the business side, brick by brick. They were going to change the world together. The fire happened in their third year, a faulty electrical panel in their first real office space. Cole had been working late as always when the smoke alarms went off. He could have gotten out easily. The exit was right there 20 feet away. But Vivian was trapped in the server room, surrounded by flames, screaming for help that wasn't coming. Cole didn't hesitate. He went back. He went back into the fire, dragged her out through smoke so thick he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Went back again for the servers that held everything they'd built. The scar on his arm was from a falling beam. He'd needed skin grafts, physical therapy, months of recovery. By the time he was healed, the company had exploded. Their software was everywhere. Investors were circling like sharks. The press wanted interviews, wanted to know the faces behind the phenomenon. But Cole had always hated the spotlight. He was happiest in the code and the quiet hours of creation. And then he met Lila. Vivian's voice softened when she talked about Lila. Cole's wife, the woman who'd seen past his awkwardness and his scars, and his tendency to disappear into his own head for hours at a time. They'd married quickly, quietly, a small ceremony that Cole had insisted on keeping out of the papers. When Rosie came along, something shifted in Cole. The company that had consumed his 20s suddenly seemed less important than the small person who looked at him like he hung the moon. When Lila got sick, Cole made his choice. Rosie was 3 years old, too young to understand why Mommy was tired all the time. Why there were so many doctor visits, why Daddy looked so sad. Cole sold his shares back to the company at a fraction of their worth. He asked for one thing in return: anonymity. His name scrubbed from the records, his face removed from the website, his existence erased from the story of Ashford Industries. "I don't want Rosie growing up in that world," he'd said. "I don't want cameras and reporters, and people who only care about us because of what we're worth. I just want to be her dad. I just want to be with Lila for whatever time we have left." And so Vivian had done what he asked. She'd let him go. She'd told the press the company had always been hers, had built an empire on the foundation he'd laid, and she'd never forgiven herself for it. Lila died 14 months later. Cole sent a single text: "She's gone. Don't contact me." Vivian had respected his wishes, had thrown herself into the company, into philanthropy, into anything that would fill the void, had convinced herself that Cole was out there somewhere, living the quiet life he'd wanted, raising his daughter, finding peace. She hadn't imagined this. "I didn't recognize you at first," she admitted. "Your hair is different. You've lost weight. And I think part of me didn't want to see. If I'd admitted it was you, I would have had to face what I'd let happen, how I'd failed you. But then I saw the scar, and I saw the way you protected Rosie, the way you put your body between her and danger without thinking. You did the same thing for me, in the fire. You didn't hesitate then either." Rosie stirred in Cole's lap, lifting her head. "Daddy saved you from a fire." Vivian smiled through her tears. "He did, sweetheart. He saved my life. And then he gave up everything so he could take care of your mommy. And you." She reached out hesitantly and brushed a strand of hair from Rosie's face. "Your daddy is the most selfless person I've ever known. The bravest, the kindest. And the fact that you didn't know, that the world didn't know that's my fault. I should have protected his legacy the way he protected me." Sloane had fled during Vivian's story, slipping out through the service entrance like the coward he was. Cole felt hollow, exposed, like a wound that had been bandaged for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "What happens now?" he asked. Vivian leaned forward, earnest. "Whatever you want. You could come back. To the company. You could have your shares back, your position, everything." But Cole was already shaking his head. "No. That's not my life anymore. It never really was. Then let me help. Please. Cole looked down at Rosie. There is one thing. Rosie's education. She's smart. She deserves chances I can't give her on a waiter's salary. A scholarship fund. Anonymous. Something that kicks in when she's ready for college. I don't want her to know where it came from. Vivian nodded. Done. What else? Cole smiled faintly. That's it. That's all I need. Vivian was crying openly now. I spent 12 years running a company built on your work, and you just want a scholarship fund. Cole looked at her for a long moment. I got the better end of the deal. I got to be there when Rosie said her first word. I got to hold Lila's hand when she took her last breath. Money can't buy time, Vivian, and I wanted all my time to be theirs. The apartment felt different when they got home. Smaller, maybe. Or perhaps Cole was seeing it with new eyes. He set Rosie down gently on the worn cushions and knelt beside her. Daddy, is all that stuff true? Were you really important? Cole smiled, brushing her hair back from her forehead. I was an engineer, baby, a long time ago. I helped start a company with Miss Vivian. Rosie processed this with the gravity only a 7-year-old could muster. But you're a waiter now. I am, Cole agreed, because being a waiter meant I could be with you. Every morning, every night. Every school pickup and homework session and bedtime story. He took her small hand in his. I could have stayed at the company and been rich, but I wouldn't have been there when you learned to ride a bike. I wouldn't have been there to hold you when you had nightmares. Money can buy a lot of things, Rosie, but it can't buy time. And I wanted all my time to be yours. Rosie reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the tracks of dried wine. That man was wrong about us. He said we were born to kneel, but you didn't kneel, Daddy. Not once. You just stood there and kept me safe. Cole's throat tightened. That's all I ever want to do, sweetheart. Keep you safe. Give you choices. Let you become whoever you want to be. The knock came just as he was getting Rosie ready for bed. Vivian stood in the hallway, still in her burgundy dress. I couldn't let the night end like that. Cole stepped aside, letting her in. She looked around at the second-hand furniture, the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator. This place feels more like a home than my penthouse ever has. The foundation I've been building, Vivian said. I wanted to actually help people. Single parents struggling to make ends meet. Kids who need someone to believe in them. Her eyes met his. I want you to help me build it, not as an employee, as a partner. Cole was quiet for a long time. Part-time, he said finally. I'll consult. But Rosie needs a father, not a CEO. Vivian's face broke into a smile. Whatever you want. She paused at the door. Sloane was right about one thing. You do know your place. Cole raised an eyebrow. Vivian smiled through tears. Standing between the people you love and anything that might hurt them. That's your place. It always has been. After she left, Cole stood in Rosie's doorway watching his daughter sleep. He crossed to the bed and kissed her forehead. She stirred. Daddy, are you happy? Cole thought about it honestly. About the apartment and the bills and the years of struggle. About the way Sloane's cruelty had crumbled to nothing in the face of simple dignity. Yes, sweetheart, he said. I really am. Rosie smiled, her eyes closing. Good. Because you're my favorite person in the whole world. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the sky. A new day was coming, and Cole Brennan, for the first time in 12 years, was ready to meet it.